Hello, I'm Tom Shives and welcome to Unstuck Company. I'd like to thank you for joining this series of videos that we're having on the Project Management Professional Certification. The first video that we did talked about what is this association PMI and what's the value of that organization. The second video talked a little bit more about the PMP itself. Why should I get my PMP? And what's it like to apply and then maybe even sit for the exam? This video here is going to be a little bit different. We're going to focus on the exam itself. What are the challenges in passing the exam, and what are some key issues that I think you need to know as you consider sitting for the PMP exam? Let's talk a little bit about the exam itself. The exam itself is a 200-question, 4-part, multiple-choice exam. They allow you 4 hours to sit for the exam. Now, there's 175 questions that are actually counted. In other words, there are 25 questions that really will not count against you, or for you for that matter, on the exam. Problem is you don't know which those 25 questions are. They're just randomly selected by PMI. They put in the exam to help them as sort of evaluate new questions and as used as control questions in the future for how they intend to change and upgrade the exam. Now, one thing interesting about it is that there is no published numerical score associated with pass or fail. Now, several years ago, PMI was publishing that, and there was a 61% pass-fail rate. But in terms of now, there is no longer that number provided to us. But it's probably something around that. Around 61% of the people actually pass the exam. Now, one of the reasons they tend to not provide that is it actually seems to depend a little bit on the questions that they ask you in terms of grading the exam and your final score. So it's somewhere in that range is what the exam scoring turns out to be. Now, in addition to that, you're only given a pass or fail score on the exam, but they do provide you a little bit of information on the domains. Now, the domains consist of the 5 process groups and also this additional one called professional responsibility, and they give you the strength in each one of those domains as they have evaluated your ability to sit and pass for this exam. Now, let's talk about some of the challenges that exist on the exam. Now, some of the engineering people, and I are one, tend to struggle with this exam because, we want to find out that right answer. Maybe we want some formula just sort of lay out there in front of us that we can remember and recall, plug and chug, get your answer, and then move on and get it right. But that's not the way this exam is structured in so many, with many other questions. In fact, many times 2 of the answers are definitely wrong as you look at that 4-part multiple choice. But yet 2 of them, they're kind of close, but one's better than another. And so you have to decide out of those, maybe those best 2 answers, which one really might be the better answer to give. Now, some project managers feel that if they just study the PMBOK that they'll pass. Usually that's not the case. I mean, you've got to be able to apply the PMBOK principles and good PM practices to situations that they give you on the exam and to the questions that they provide you. Some also believe that, I've been doing project management for 25 years, so I'm sure I can just go cold turkey, sit down, and take the exam. That belief couldn't be farther from the truth. PM has a language, they have a format and a framework and processes that you have to understand and be able to apply, and also be able to understand and feed back to them. So, just because you're a project manager and have been a project manager for years does not mean you're going to be able to successfully sit without some extensive amount of study and preparation. So I have to also stress the fact that it's also what PMI feels is important. So it's not just what you feel is important as a project manager, but PMI and the people that put the test questions together, they're the ones that decided what's important, and you have to put put your PMI hat on and go from there and figure out how you can, in fact, think about how PMI might want you to respond to this question. Well, how does the exam break down? Well, we've got around 11% of the questions are in the initiating process group. So about 10% are about the, how do you begin and open up new projects or phases. About 23% of the questions on the exam are on planning. 27% are on executing. 21% on monitoring and controlling. And then closing is about 9% of the exam questions. And then that last domain, the professional responsibility, that domain there consists of about 9% of the questions would be in that area. Now you might ask yourself, well, why do I care about the breakdown of questions? Well, let me tell you why. You know, if you look at the PMBOK and you look at the 42 processes that they have that's underneath those 5 process groups, you know, you'll discover that 20 of them are on planning. And if I look 20 on planning out of the total 42, you might think that maybe about half of the questions are going to be on planning. But you wouldn't want to really focus on that because only 23% of the questions are really on planning. So that's why it's important to know that, and then it also provides you when people like myself help people pass the exam, we have you evaluate yourself in those different area groups so that you can really focus either on the knowledge areas or focus on the process groups that you really need to study a little bit more. So it's important to kind of see a breakdown of that. Now, what kind of questions are really come on the exam? Some of them are factual or computational. And for us engineers, we're just all excited about those. Those type of questions might be in earned value. They might be in computing the critical path. They might ask you even to, you know, calculate the number of communications paths that exist on a team of a certain number of people. And so those are what I would call fairly easy questions because all you have to do is know how to apply that math and understand it, and you get a correct answer. But there's also a good number of questions that explore this idea of inputs, outputs, and tools and techniques. Now, PMI, for these 42 processes, every one of them has a certain number of inputs, they have a certain number of outputs, and then what we do is they have tools and techniques that help you turn those inputs into outputs. And so you might be asked a question that says, well, suppose a project manager is developing a project scope statement. Well, they might be wondering, well, what kind of tools would they need? And so you might be given a multiple choice question that would give you a list of candidates, and maybe only one of them is one of the tools that you would not use, and so you would be asked to describe and pick which one of those would you not use, for instance, in doing a project scope planning effort. Or you might be preparing a quality plan, and you're asked the same thing. You know, name one of the techniques that is generally not a tool or technique in developing a quality plan. So it gets pretty extensive, and so you would need to have a good knowledge and grasp of the tools and techniques and those inputs and outputs in order for you to do well on the exam. You'd have to know, well, which ones are really the favorite ones, the ones that really you need to know that to study more on because they're more emphasized by the PMI test practitioners. Now, in addition to that, we get to what I call the really tough ones. I mean, these are the ones that are situational questions, and they're even ethical questions that are kind of frequent occurrences you'll see on the exam, spread out through actually all the process groups. Questions about dealing in foreign countries, maybe where there's a difference in handling ethics and where the standards in that foreign countries may be different than the one that you're used to using. So what happens when you have these competing ethical standards, and which ones do you follow, for instance? There are also questions situational about how you're treating your stakeholders, and going back to our professional responsibility as project managers to consider the needs of all the stakeholders. And so these situational questions, I think, are really the toughest because we've got to apply principles. We have to be able to take that knowledge that we understand and then evaluate them from a PMI perspective and say, this is the right thing to do, and this is out of the top two maybe choices that end up being the best ones. You have to pick one of them that says, in this situation, this would be the one that I would pick. So to me, the tough questions are really those situational questions. So I don't know where you're at right now in thinking about the exam. I would like you to just think about what it would be like to maybe be to go to your first PMI meeting after having got your PMP, and people ask you to stand, because that's a standard thing we do in many of our chapters, is that we ask those people that have sat for the exam, you stand, you get recognized. It's a small little benefit, but I want you to imagine what that would be like to have this behind you. And so I'd just like to ask you, where are you standing today? What are you thinking about, and what are those things that might stand in front of you for you to take the exam? Now, we're going to spend our last video that'll come up after the end of this one that will help you consider what are some next options for you. In other words, what do I need to think about, and what are some next steps? And I want you to rest easy. If you've got some angst over kind of some of the material that we've covered because we've raised your awareness of some of the toughness of the exam, I want you just to sit back a little bit and because that's normal. In fact, if it wasn't, I'd probably ask you to just maybe go check your pulse or something just to make sure that you're okay. Because I want you to realize that if you've made it through here in the process, that you're really ready for this next step. And once again, I'm just really honored today that you spent the last few minutes with me. And I'd like you to just to kind of rest easy. We're going to give you one more video for you to look at. And I want you to realize that, you know, you're going to be able to pass this exam. And it's going to be something you'll have behind you. It'll be a good accomplishment that you'll have in your career and set you up for some of the benefits that you'll have by sitting and passing that exam. Thank you again for your time today. I'm Tom Shives from Unstuck Company.